Sigma Theta Tau International is fortunate to count the Baxter International Foundation as a friend of nursing research, and we are pleased to recognize the foundation as the sponsor of this plenary session. Baxter has been a leader in healthcare for more than 80 years, helping nurses, doctors, and their patients address a broad array of chronic and acute medical challenges. Baxter International's philanthropic arm, the Baxter International Foundation, is focused exclusively on increasing access to health care, and particularly for disadvantaged and underserved populations in or near the communities where Baxter employees live and work. Since 1989, the foundation has sponsored the Episteme Award, which has previously awarded such luminaries as Nancy Bergstrom, Mary Naylor, Linda Aiken, and Loretta Sweet Jamont. We're so proud of this continuing partnership with the foundation, and today we're pleased to welcome Donna Namath, Executive Director for the Baxter International Foundation, who will introduce the 2013 recipient of our most prestigious award.
Thank you, Dr. Sherwood. I'm pleased to be here with all of you this morning to present the award. Dr. Ferrell's work touches me deeply on a very personal level. Across their broad range of professional roles and responsibilities, nurses spend more time with terminally ill patients than any other group of healthcare professionals. Yet even nurses with the greatest technical expertise and interpersonal skills may not be well prepared to provide quality palliative care. Early in her career, Dr. Betty Ferrell recognized this knowledge and skill gap. And since then, she has made it, addressing it, her life's work. Dr. Ferrell is a professor and research scientist at the City of Hope National Medical Center in Los Angeles and a fellow of the American Academy of Nursing. Over the course of her distinguished career, she has emerged as a leading researcher and authority on palliative care and quality of life issues, authoring 8 books and more than 300 articles on these crucial yet under-examined topics. In the year 2000, Dr. Ferrell initiated a collaborative effort with the American Association of College of Nursing to produce a seminal palliative nursing education program called the End-of-Life Nursing Education Consortium, or ELNEC. For the past 13 years, she has served as ELNEC's principal investigator, guiding the program's development and global expansion with dedication and with care. Dr. Ferrell and her team developed ELNEC's core content as an 8-module train-the-trainer course for nurses in the United States. This course prepares nurses to provide specialized care and support for patients and their families at one of life's most difficult times, with topics ranging from pain management to care at the time of death. Dr. Ferrell and her team soon recognized an opportunity to expand the ELNEC curriculum, which led to the development of coursework for graduate nursing faculty, oncology, pediatric, and geriatric nursing, critical care, veterans with life-threatening illnesses, and public hospitals. As word spread about ELNEC, Dr. Ferrell began receiving inquiries from outside the United States, and soon the program began its international expansion. To date, more than 16,000 nurses and other healthcare professionals from all 50 states, 77 countries, and 6 continents have participated in ELNEC courses. They are now trainers in educational and clinical settings. In fact, since the program's inception, it is estimated that these trainers have shared ELNEC training with more than 400,000 nurses and other healthcare providers worldwide. 400,000. As for Dr. Ferrell, she's personally traveled to more than 40 countries to deliver training and promote palliative care education for nurses. Dr. Ferrell is known around the world for changing the face of end-of-life care, Because of her vision and leadership, hundreds of thousands of nurses across the globe are better able to provide support and comfort for end-of-life patients and their families, better able to practice with integrity, and care for the human spirit with respect and dignity. Dr. Ferrell, on behalf of the Baxter International Foundation, we thank you for your groundbreaking work and congratulate you on receiving the 2013 Episteme Award.
Thank you, Ms. Namath. Now I invite STTI President Suzanne Prevost and CEO Patricia Thompson to join Ms. Namath in presenting the 2013 Episteme Award to an outstanding scholar, educator, clinical researcher, role model, and mentor, Dr. Betty R. Ferrell.
Dr. Ferrell, on behalf of the Sigma Theta Chi International Board of Directors, I am personally delighted to congratulate you with this award. As someone who has participated in several of your ELNEC programs, I can vouch for the impact it's had on nurses that I work with, and I think you're clearly an example of a researcher who's made an impact not only in North America but around the world, so we're delighted to honor you this way. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the 2013 Episteme Award recipient and our plenary 2 keynote speaker, Betty Ferrell.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for being here and for this wonderful collective of nursing knowledge and dedication around the world. It is indeed my incredible honor to accept this award, and I hope that you know that everything you just heard about my work, I can promise you I've done not one single thing alone. I'm a part of a team of wonderful colleagues around the world who are working together in this project and all of the projects in our work in palliative care. I wanted to thank 2 of the people who are here who were a part of my nomination for this very prestigious award, Dr. Mary Lou Kopp and Dr. Judith Pace. I also really want to thank Sigma Theta Chi International for the role that they have played in my professional career, and I think the lives and careers of nurses throughout the world. This award comes at a really significant time because as I looked back at the dates, as I was notified that I would receive this award, I realized that this year marks the 30th year since I was inducted in Sigma Theta Chi as a graduate student. Little did I know, 30 years ago, the path that my career would take and the many opportunities that I would be afforded. But one thing I know for sure, one thing I know very clearly, and that has become even more clear in the last 10 years as I've been involved in international work, is that when nurses are educated and when nurses are empowered, it means patients and families, societies, the public receive a much higher quality of care. And so thank you, Sigma Theta Chi International, because your advocacy, your leadership, your place for our profession in advancing nursing knowledge internationally matters to patients in villages and huts and towns and communities around the world. For all of you who are in the room who are students, doctoral students, graduate students, those of you just beginning a nursing career, I particularly want to honor you because you are beginning the most incredible adventure of your life, and I wish for all of you that you would have the great opportunities that I've had to touch lives and to be inspired by my nursing colleagues. I also want to thank the Baxter International Foundation because each of us in nursing know that our educational programs, our clinical services, our scholarships, none of these things are possible, and certainly in these economic times, without people who believe in nursing. And so thanks to the foundation, thanks to this very important organization for all that you have done to make this possible. I'm here today to share with you my work that I think represents the things that I have been honored for today, I and my team, for our international work in advancing palliative care. And so I will share with you these words about the global imperative of palliative care. I do this to share with you what we have accomplished, but hopefully, even more importantly, what is the work that is yet to be done, and what are all the opportunities for each of you to be a part of this work. One of the other things that I've come to realize so acutely throughout the world is that palliative care exists not just for people with cancer, not just for the oldest patients, but palliative care is important for children who will die at the time of birth in underdeveloped countries, in neonatal intensive care units, in pediatric units, in long-term care facilities, in homes, in our growing geriatric populations. For every population in every clinical setting, excellent palliative care is an important component of excellent health care. And so we all have an opportunity to participate in this growing field of palliative care. Just to begin and think about all of this work, I take you to a village in Kenya. I was contacted many years ago by a nurse. Her name is Joyce Marete. I'll share a little bit more about her later. But Joyce contacted me several years ago and said that she was a nurse working in Nairobi. Joyce's story is that she had left her children and husband behind in a small rural community in Kenya because she wanted to become a nurse. And so Joyce went to the big city, to Nairobi, and she became a nurse. But her dream was to go back to her small community so that she could begin to impact end-of-life care for people in incredibly remote areas here in Africa and Kenya. Joyce wanted to be the first nurse to do research, the first nurse to use knowledge and evidence to change practice. And in her case, she wanted to do wound care in the seriously ill and dying. Joyce contacted me and asked if I would be a research mentor because she was applying for a research grant, a first experience, and so I agreed to be her research mentor. A few months later, she contacted me to share the great news that she had received the grant, and then she said, "Oh, by the way, I forgot to tell you, part of being my mentor is that you're supposed to come here to Kenya." So I and my colleagues went to Kenya and helped Joyce to carry out the first training course there, where we trained over 200 professionals, and we learned, of course, a lot about our colleagues in Kenya. The hut you see in the background is the hut that was actually the schoolhouse where Joyce lived as a child. And after Joyce became a nurse, her community offered her to give her this hut to come back and start her nurse-run clinic in Kenya. So my work today is dedicated to nurses like Joyce throughout the world because they're the real heroes of improving end-of-life care in every corner of the world today. It's with great gratitude to the ELNEC Project team and to all these professionals throughout the world who, as we sit in this room today, are improving care of the dying. The numbers are enormous and we can't ignore them. If we start, for example, with just the fact that 570,000 people die of cancer in the United States every year, but of course, that's just one figure and one group that we've addressed. But approximately 7.6 million people die from cancer in the world each year. And of course, there are far more millions of people who die from TB, malaria, and AIDS. As I've traveled around the world and we've made rounds in communities and hospitals, it always strikes me that most of the people we see have cancer, TB, malaria, and AIDS. For each of these people, though, we need to realize that the end of life is not just failure, It's not just an end. The end of life is an opportunity for profound meaning, healing, comfort, and growth. And it is through the hands, the voice, the work of nursing that we can transform the experience at the end of life to, in fact, to be a profound, sacred, healing experience. But absolutely none of this would be possible without expert nursing care. So the pictures that you see are my colleagues, Dr. Judith Pace, who's here with me today, Dr. Nessa Coyle from Memorial Sloan Kettering, who, as I speak today, is in Kazakhstan carrying out one of our courses there, and Patrick Coyne, who is at Virginia Commonwealth University. This core of colleagues, with many, many others around the country and around the world, have taken the end-of-life curriculum to many, many places. Throughout the world, caregivers are applying the clinical knowledge and scholarship of nursing to improve care of the seriously ill and dying. There are many differences as we travel around the world, but one of the similarities is that in every one of the 77 countries that we've touched, it is nurses who are at the bedside of the seriously ill and dying. It is nurses who are asking questions, why can't we do a better job? It is nurses who are advocating for access to pain medications. It is nurses who are starting hospices. These nurses are working collaboratively with physicians, public health officials, ministers of health, chaplains, social workers, but nurses are leading the way in palliative care as an incredible part of our public health system. As I thought today how I could really even begin to summarize the work that is going on by our wonderful nursing colleagues around the world, I summarized for you what I consider 5 key themes of what it means to be applying the evidence of palliative care research to the bedside of the seriously ill and dying. The 5 themes, I think, really do capture what I've observed in my nurse colleagues around the world. The first theme is that nurses are changing the paradigm of care. Nurses are working in countries where, until very recent years, it has been absolutely taboo to even say the word death, dying, or end of life. Nurses are breaking important ground in countries where it is still not acceptable for patients to even be told their diagnoses. Nurses are breaking ground in countries where if a child dies in childbirth, the child is taken away from the mother, and the mother and family never even have the opportunity to see the child. Nurses are changing the paradigms of care, and when we make these important changes, care happens differently. The second important theme is that we are creating expertise and knowledge in palliative care. One of the mantras that we use in the ELNEC Project is, nurses cannot practice what they do not know. Nurses cannot practice what they do not know. And what that means is that if we expect the nurses of tomorrow to be at the bedside, relieving pain, being culturally respectful, addressing ethical issues, providing compassionate and competent care in the last hours of life, it will be because educators, like many of you in this audience, have prepared those nurses to do this work. The third theme is fostering nursing presence. As all of you know, providing compassionate and competent end-of-life care is not just a matter of teaching nurses what medication to give, what dose. It is a matter of teaching nurses how to be present to dying people. We have been in many countries around the world who have nothing more than paracetamol to give patients who have severe pain and symptoms at the end of life. And yet we have seen nurses, through their presence, who provide tremendous comfort to people who are dying. The fourth theme is that around the world, nurses are making incredible progress in expert attention to the body and to the relief of symptoms. It is, in fact, our role to be advocating for governments, through ministers of health, through public health programs, through the World Health Organization, through all of the ways that we can to get access to medications. Just last week at one of our ELNEC courses, we included 2 guests who were with us in Washington, D.C. from Swaziland. This month, Swaziland will have, for the first time, morphine to give to the millions of people who are dying there, still a country with more than 40% of people with HIV/AIDS. And yet they have no promise, no idea if morphine will be there next month. And so there is much work that we have to do to get access to medications, but then to ensure that providers have the ability and the knowledge to treat symptoms and pain. And the final theme is that palliative care should be seen as a vision of the end of life as a spiritual experience. The first theme is challenging the paradigm of care. And what I want to do is just really share with you several photographs and some faces of nurses around the world who are doing amazing work of changing the paradigm of care. The care for so long in our country and around the world has been that good care means that we do more, that we build more technology, more intensive care units, that we prolong life. And yet for many people, we are beginning to rethink some of those values and goals. We are beginning to imagine health care that honors people's lives at the end of life. Many years ago, 2 nurses, David Kahn and Rick Steves, did some amazing qualitative work on the role of witness and moral agent. What David and Rick shared at that time was that nurses are the people often closest to the patient across settings when they are at the end of life. And what they described was that the role of nurses, that we have the privilege, the absolute privilege of being the first-hand observers, and that being there, we have the ability to provide voice. In nursing, and certainly Sigma Theta Tau has been an incredible advocate, that as nurses, our job, our mission is to advocate for the underserved, for the least empowered. And we also often think of ethnic groups, we think of young or old. But it is my experience that people who are seriously ill and people who are dying are some of the least empowered people in the world. And so, as these nurse theorists taught us, that if we can become the voice for the seriously ill and dying, if we can be the first-hand observers there to tell the story, that in fact we can do much to change care. They also told us that our role as nurses is to play a ceremonial role, ritual. I'll share an example a little bit later of a wonderful nurse, Julie, who has started one of the model hospice programs in Kenya. What Julie does is to not only try to get access to medications, she has built a place where people can come to die. She has made this self-sustaining. She even built the mortuary so they could provide this end-of-life care for patients. But what Julie also does is to orchestrate rituals, including the ability for family members, for young children to have memories of their parents who are dying. As nurses, we are the expert witnesses. We can tell the story because we have been there. And most importantly of all, nurses are visionaries. Everywhere we travel in the world, we hear the stories of nurses, and they tell us what it's like to have no medications, to have still 30 to 40% of children die before school age. Even in developed countries, what it is like when patients still continue to receive life-prolonging therapies when the goals of care should be focused on comfort. But the real difference is the nurses who are changing the world are nurses who have a vision. It could be better. These are nurses who can tell you what good care would look like and what it would be like. People around the world ask us, what is the definition of palliative care? There are many definitions that I could share with you, but my favorite definition of all is good end-of-life care is the kind of care that you and I would want if we or someone we love is dying. That's what each of us in this room should be working toward. The second theme is that nurses involved in palliative care are creating expertise and knowledge in palliative care. We've had the opportunity to do a lot of work throughout Eastern Europe, many former Russian states now developing democracies, nurses who are at the forefront of developing healthcare systems. We have been in 6 of the 7 continents, and what we have seen is that we cannot change practice until we advance knowledge. We have been in several countries, and I can share one of our first Eastern European experiences. We were inviting countries to come who were developing and to learn palliative care, to integrate palliative care in schools of nursing. When we began to receive the applications for the faculty, we were a little confused because we realized that the applications were coming from physicians. When we tried to make contact and clarify, what we were told is that these are countries for whom nurses could not be taught by nurses. Only physicians could teach nurses. And so we brought these physician educators together and found that they were actually very compassionate, very dedicated to professional nursing. And now, these years later, I'm very pleased to tell you that we are seeing the nurses that have been trained now become the faculty. I'll share with you one of these nurses later in Romania who has now contacted us to say with the money that we have provided, she is now starting a PhD program. So changing nurses one by one changes the profession of nursing, but most importantly, it changes the way that care is delivered for patients, especially for patients at the end of life. The End-of-Life Nursing Education Consortium started in the year 2001. We started with a group of about 5 nurses sitting at a table, just like in front of you, with a white tablecloth, blank paper in front of us saying, oh my gosh, what should we do? What should we teach? And because of the evidence base of nursing, because of the thoughts of nurses, we began to say, well, what are the key elements of good end-of-life care? And so the domains, the modules of ELNEC became developed. The domains include a focus on palliative nursing care. What does nursing care look like when our goal is not to rehabilitate the patient, cure the patient, but when our goal is to comfort the patient? The second domain is good pain management, because people will not have the opportunity to experience death as a sacred experience if they are dying in severe pain and suffering with symptoms. The third module is symptom management, because we know that people who are seriously ill have not only pain, they have delirium and anxiety and depression and dyspnea and a host of other physical symptoms. The fourth module is ethics. Around the world, we have learned, and every time we're in countries, I often am presenting the ethics content, and so I'm always wondering and very cautious about, presenting perhaps our culturally biased thoughts about ethical issues. And yet in every country, the nurses say, please talk to us. They talk to us about their moral dilemmas. Our fifth module is culture, because our goal is, of course, to talk about end-of-life care, knowing that there are tremendous cultural influences on death and dying and how we practice. The sixth module is communication, how nurses can use effective listening skills and communication skills to help patients to identify values and goals, to explain prognosis, to assist in family conferences. Our seventh module reminds us that nursing care doesn't end when the patient dies, but extends to the family during the bereavement period, and so we teach about loss, grief, and bereavement. I'll always remember teaching our first course in Africa, in Tanzania. As we stood up to begin to teach these nurses about bereavement, I realized that every nurse in the room, there were some Muslim women dressed in their bereavement attire, because a part of their tradition was that if they had lost someone close in their family, that they wore particular clothing for a period of time. And so we stood up to teach grief, loss, and bereavement amongst people who probably everyone in the room had lost a child, and many other close people in their family. And so again, every experience of teaching nurses is an experience for us to learn what it means to do this care around the world. And our final module is final hours, because we know that there's special knowledge and evidence to guide us as we care for people in the final hours of life. So this curriculum has now been extended to 77 countries and 6 continents, and most importantly, it's been extended to the bedside of patients across settings of care. This is Rose Virani, and I always, every time I am honored or have the opportunity to speak about our work, I want everyone to realize that I'm here standing in front of you, but I'm a part of a team, and that team includes at the very front of the ship, the captain, Rose Virani. Rose is the nurse educator. Rose is the person who has helped develop the curriculum that you see here. We started with one curriculum, our core curriculum. We thought we were going to do 5 courses. We would be done with improving end-of-life care, and that, of course, is now 12 years ago. With Rose's expert guidance, ELNEC has taken on many lives. About 2 years into the curriculum, I had many nurses approach us and say, we really need pediatric end-of-life care, and so we developed the pediatric ELNEC curriculum. We developed a geriatric curriculum focused on care in long-term care facilities, a critical care curriculum, which is so important in countries that have a high extent of critical care use. This year, we launched the advanced practice module because we know that nurses with advanced degrees, advanced practice nurses, and now, of course, our doctorates of nursing practice will be leading the way in changing systems of care. One of our highest honors is that over a 3-year period of time, we were working with the VA administration so that we train nurses in all of the VA hospitals in the United States so that we could advocate for better care for dying veterans. And in February, we will launch the first course focused on ELNEC for Doctorate of Nursing Practice. And so we will be teaching faculty within the DNP programs to integrate palliative care so that these future clinical leaders can integrate palliative care within their role. Now, I'm going to come back and say something about the translation of this curriculum, but before I move from this slide, I want everybody to look at those big notebooks, and I want you to notice that our curriculum ranges across these programs, but is often anywhere from 600 to 800 pages long across these modules and resources, and you'll understand why in just a moment. This is some of our work in Europe. We've done a lot of work in Eastern Europe and more recently some work in Western Europe. Last month we were in the country of Germany. The government of Germany has used ELNEC and translated it now to roll out ELNEC throughout Germany as an interdisciplinary curriculum. Much of our work around the world has actually involved both medical education and nursing education. But we've had incredible opportunities in the developing countries of Eastern Europe, and as I mentioned in Romania, we met these wonderful nurses from Romania. I have to share with you a fun story. Judy Pace and I and our colleagues were in Austria, where we do much of our training because it's a neutral ground, and countries who have been a part of each other, who have been at war with each other, come together in Austria, and we do this wonderful training. We were bringing together about 4 nurses from various countries, but the nurses from Romania called and said, you know, with the money you've provided us from airfare, could we take that money and drive from Romania to Austria, look at the map, and bring more nurses because we have so much work to do. And so we were standing outside our facility one day as this old minivan rolled into the parking lot, and 9 of the most enthusiastic humans I have ever seen got out of that bus, having spent a long road from Romania. These nurses had no idea how brilliant they were. They thought they were behind, and instead what we realized, they were far ahead. And so I'm also really pleased to share that this year we began working with these incredible nurses in Romania to create a leadership center there so that they can take on much of the work that we've been doing to extend ELNEC even greater throughout Eastern Europe. So when we give nurses tools, when we give them the evidence, when we give them the curriculum, nurses can not only teach and practice, but nurses can become leaders. And we're it's so valuable to have nurses take on the leadership work around the world. This is an example of also a nurse from one of our first curriculum, and that is a nurse in Armenia, Aprine Grigoryan, who also has since received a doctoral degree and is back in her country in a cancer center. The amazing thing that I've learned across the world is I could tell you nurse by nurse, show me a map, and I can tell you the name of the nurse that came forward, one nurse to say, I want to improve end-of-life care in my country. And it is the dedication of that one nurse that moves things ahead. In Russia, we have seen nurses, again, working with so many rich cultural values, bringing their traditions, their language, their practices, religion, to share with us and to help us incorporate good palliative care practices for patients in their setting. In Asia, we've had the opportunity to work with many countries around the world. I'll be leaving this conference today and going to Thailand, and I understand there are many people here from Thailand with the new charter, but we will be training many countries in an international oncology nursing meeting that will host ELNEC as a pre-conference, and so we're hopeful to extend our work even further within Asia. In the Philippines, we've done important work, and one of the things I want to acknowledge is that we've done extensive work in Japan, and then, of course, little did we know that shortly after our work in Japan, the ability of ELNEC-trained nurses in Japan to respond to the grief, loss, and bereavement of tsunamis and other natural disasters. Nurses who we have trained in ELNEC are now in the Philippines because, of course, all of our hearts are there with our colleagues with the tremendous loss. One of our colleagues is with a group in Kazakhstan today, but she will be leaving there to go to the Philippines to assist in the efforts there. So this palliative care work we often think of as helping the seriously ill and dying, but there's tremendous application to natural disasters, to just the extreme poverty and hunger that we all know exist in many corners of the world. One of our great role models is Hyun Sook Kim, who is an amazing educator in Korea. She is one of those nurses who contacted us to say that she'd seen the great work going on in Japan and she would like to extend this in Korea. Her vision and leadership has improved care of the dying in Korea. Now remember, I showed you a few slides ago those huge notebooks. So when nurses call us and say, I want to translate the curriculum to my language, realize what that work means. And so Hyun Sook Kim and her colleagues have translated every word of our curriculum, our core curriculum, our pediatric curriculum, and now our geriatric curriculum for their countries. And this has happened over and over again. They have held courses throughout the country, and they are changing the face of dying in this country. This is from our training in Korea, and then a follow-up visit where they extended into pediatric care. This is a course with many nursing students attending, and again, as we go into country after country, one of the things we always say is please involve the nurse educators, because if you ever think that you're going to change the practice of healthcare in your country, it will only be if you educate the future generation of providers, so bring in the students. This is from an ELNEC-Geriatric Train-the-Trainer course, again, trying to make sure that we're extending care into long-term care settings and elder care that often is happening only in communities, and again, a pediatric training program. These are examples of our translation. We have a fun time in our office when nurses translate the curriculum. They mail it to us, we open it up, and we say, we have no idea what it says, but it looks really great. And we know that a lot of work has happened and that it's doing great things in these countries. One of the things that we have encouraged the nurses to do is to publish their work, and so it's been an amazing opportunity to see nurses publish. We have several chapters in our Oxford textbook of palliative nursing from these countries. We have nurses, this is Hyun Sook Kim on the cover of the Journal of Hospice and Palliative Nursing. We've had a recent article, Dr. Judith Pace helped and mentored a colleague from Kyrgyzstan to write an article about the end-of-life work there. So getting nurses to share their work through publications. Two of our colleagues have since received international awards for their palliative care work from Japan and from Korea, and so again, we are fostering these leaders. Sayaka Takenouchi is one of my role models. Sayaka came to us about 10 years ago as a very young doctoral student. She approached us at a course, a very young, incredibly passionate woman, and her very timid voice said, I would like to bring ELNEC to Japan. She was beginning her doctoral program and asked if it was okay with her faculty, would it be okay with us if for her doctoral project she translated our curriculum, and we said, of course. This had particular meaning for me because I had been in Japan now probably between 15 and 20 years ago. I was speaking on pain management, but there was a question in the audience that asked me if I would comment on, as coming from the United States, could I comment on my beliefs about should patients be told their diagnoses? And when I shared my honest beliefs, there was a tremendous angst in the audience, and I was essentially asked to leave the country. because this was a time where there was still a very patriarchal, strong, dominant medical culture that patients should not be told their diagnoses, much less prognosis. It therefore was an incredible honor for me to be asked to come back to Japan to speak, first to nurses, and last year to come to the Tokyo Convention Center to speak to 6,000 physicians about end-of-life care. I emailed Sayaka a couple of weeks ago to let her know I would be coming here to share her story, and Sayaka shared with me that now through their training programs, there are 4,000 ELNEC trainers in Japan who have carried out 140 ELNEC courses. That's a really good start to changing the culture of care. Again, what I want you to see is that one nurse changes a country. Again, one of our great heroes is John Lunn, who approached us at a course we were holding in Dallas, Texas. He's a nurse and a chaplain, and he told us that he was there, of course, to be an ELNEC trainer. A few weeks later, he emailed us and said, oh, by the way, I've decided to move back to India, and I wanted for you to have my contact information. A few months later, he contacted us again and said, I'm in India, and boy, did they need ELNEC. And so, again, we have very few resources. We have very little funding. Our strategy is always to find what we can and who we can and go wherever we can and plant a few seeds and support people who are there. And so with a few $1,000s, we managed to find 2 of our expert trainers who would volunteer their time. We bought airfare. We sent these nurses to work with John, and 2 courses were held in India. John has continued to include us, and so with the work in India, he then contacted me last year and said he was moving on to Malaysia and Indonesia. When we began to talk about how we could help him, one of the things that really warmed my soul was for him to say, we're going to be doing a lot of huge training across both countries. It's going to be very intensive work. We're doing both the core work as well as pediatrics. I just need 2 faculty to come again, though, because 2 of the nurses we trained in India will be coming along with us. And so, again, we're paying it forward. Nurses who are trained go on to train others. This is from a course in Nairobi, and when Judy and I and others were in Nairobi, we arrived to learn that they had orchestrated from the 40 precincts throughout the country of Kenya that there were faculty representing every nurse in school. That's a good way to begin to start changing practice. Nurses also are not only extending knowledge, they're extending their presence. And so our work, we hope, is also a reminder that much of the therapy at end of life is us. It is the nurse at the bedside. So through our training, we try to foster presence. How do you sit by someone who is dying, even if you are the only thing there to offer? How can you be present to children, to elderly people, in a variety of cultures? How can we extend into cultures and languages for even the concept of death is rarely discussed? This is Pam and I who are in Kenya, and we've seen in many countries, for example, in this picture, what you see is that we've seen countries that if your child is diagnosed with a serious illness such as AIDS, the most compassionate thing a parent can do is to immediately go and abandon their child at the doorstep of a hospital, because it's likely the only way that the child will get any care at all. And so we were on this AIDS ward with 90 children who would live the rest of their life in this hospital. But nurses are there to be not only the nurses, but the constant presence, the mothers, the fathers, the love for these children until the end of their lives. We've been in countries such as Slovakia, where nurses are still facing tremendous challenges. The role of women, the role of nurses has tremendous, tremendous work to be done. And yet, even in the most weak of positions, even with very little power, nurses are changing the practices at the end of life. I can't tell you how many nurses have said to us, if all I can do is to go back into my country and teach just one more nurse, my work is done. And that is always the message we give in these countries. In countries such as Saudi Arabia, again, where we're working with Ingrid Porter in educating about end-of-life care, and you can only imagine, again, the work, the tremendous challenges of the role of women in nursing in these countries, much less nurses to change care. Several years ago in an ELNEC course, I asked nurses to write narratives about how they saw their role in suffering. What do you do for patients who are suffering? It happened to be a critical care group, and as I was sorting through the surveys at the end of the course, one survey caught my attention because in big, bold letters under the sentence that we had written, "What do you do to relieve suffering?" this critical care nurse had written in letters about an inch tall, "I show up." And then her narrative said, "Sometimes we can only witness. We cannot fix or do the work of creating meaning. This family responds to support, to ideas, to reframing, but ultimately they have to wrestle with the guilt themselves. We can provide a container, a holding environment of safety, so they don't have to do this in isolation. We can keep showing up even when it's messy and ragged and uncomfortable." And today, you and I honor the nurses who are showing up, because if you just show up, you begin to change the practice of care. Nurses such as Judy, my other colleagues, are in these countries helping nurses to provide expert attention to the care of the body and the relief of symptoms. Throughout Africa, throughout Asia, throughout the world, teaching nurses to use the medications they have in the ways that they can to provide relief of symptoms. This is Joyce, who I mentioned to you earlier, who had gone back into her village. When we first approached the medical director, when Joyce told me that her dream was to go back into this small community, I asked her medical director, well, what would it cost if we tried to support Joyce? She thought about it and she said, you know, I think if you could help us get her started and we could demonstrate what she's doing, we could get more support. The cost for Joyce's salary, medications, supplies, was $6,000 for that first year. It doesn't take a lot to help nurses in many countries to do this work. These are some words shared by a physician in one of these developing countries. Suffering is by no means a privilege, a sign of nobility, a reminder of God. Suffering is a fierce, bestial thing, commonplace, uncalled for, natural as air. It is intangible. No one can grasp it or fight against it. It dwells in time. Is the same thing as time. If it comes in fits and starts, that is only so as to leave the sufferer more defenseless during the moments that follow. Those long moments when one relieves the last bout of torture and waits for the next. And so nurses relieve suffering. This is Pam Malloy, who last month went to Kenya to support one of the nurses there who has created and now built that hospice that you just saw. Julie McGowan Boyd, who is a Sigma Theta Tau member, a graduate of the Azusa Pacific School of Nursing, went to Kenya and started this hospice program herself. In this hospice program, though, it is designed, it was envisioned, it is run by a nurse, and you can tell it when you're there. Because what Julie knows is that it's not just about providing medication. These are some pictures Pam sent from the visit last month. There's a patient who is in that hospice and knows that he will not die alone. This is a young woman who is dying, and yet Julie thought it was important to go get her young child and bring that child to this room so she could visit with her mother. She took pictures. She wanted this child to have a memory of her mother being cared for and to know that her mother loved her. And the mother in this picture died 4 days later. But that child will know that she was cared for by a nurse who knew how to relieve suffering and that better care is possible in that country. There's still enormous cultural barriers. This is a child who lives alone in a hut because she has cerebral palsy, and because the people there, there's such cultural taboos, and this is a mysterious disease, and so they don't want to be near her. And so to respect the culture, she remains alone, and yet various people come in daily to help this child. We work within the cultural beliefs and resources, but care is changed. Children are cared for and loved and nurtured. That's Julie, by the way. Finally, I want to leave you with this notion that spiritual care is a critical element of all that we do in palliative care, because palliative care and what we've seen in these nurses is because of a vision of the end of life as a truly spiritual experience, regardless of religious affiliation. This is Carol Franco. Carol came to ELNEC and introduced herself and told us that her job is as a public health nurse on the island of Molokai, a part of Hawaii. Molokai, as you may know, was converted to be a leprosy colony, of course, many, many years ago. And this colony was created as countries around the world wanted to take people with leprosy and to remove them and basically dump them onto this area because they were afraid of this disease. Leprosy was cured, and yet many of the people who lived there had leprosy their whole lives, and so the state has honored their need to stay and to live out their lives. Today, as we are here, there are less than 20 people who remain with leprosy, but the commitment is to let them die within this area of Molokai. And it is Carol and a small group of nurses and others who are caring for these people to honor their ability to die. I went to Molokai. The public isn't allowed in this area, in the leprosy colony that exists, but Carol allowed me to come to Molokai, and she took me to the place and she showed me this is the place where ships would come and to bring the people with leprosy, and yet the ships were afraid to come near the land, and so they threw the people into the water, and they would have to swim to the island. And of course, many of them died in the water and didn't even make it to the island. This is such a metaphor because around the world, people are still abandoned. They are thrown to systems of care that don't provide the kind of care that they need. But fortunately, there was this safe place. There was this island of Molokai. This is the island showing you the thousands and thousands of graves of the people who were cared for and who died with good care. These are the visitation booths where people could be visited from those who did not have leprosy. When I visited the nurses, there's a religious community there, the nuns who are providing this care. One of the nuns said to me, "The legacy of Molokai began as one of indignity, but we have the opportunity to end the legacy with dignity." This nun must have been 80 years old, and she told me, "I will be here until the last patient dies." This is the quest of nursing. We have the ability to provide dignity where there has been indignity. I will end with a quote from also a physician and a religious leader. This is a physician who wrote a book called Rebirth of the Clinic. I end with this because many of us are in countries who are trying to, quote, reform healthcare. But we need to remember that the reform of healthcare is not just changing the way that healthcare is paid for. The reform of healthcare gives us an opportunity to reform healthcare and to make sure that palliative care is valued as a sacred part of care. Under this new medical covenant, a spiritual scientific practitioner, and I challenge you that all of us as nurses are spiritual scientific practitioners, affirm the transcendent is made manifest at the edge of the surgeon's knife, at the tips of the palpating fingers of the pediatrician, in the firm handshake of the internist, in the birth of the child whose unwed mother has AIDS, in the tears of the woman who feels a hard lump in her one remaining breast, and in the vacant stare of the elderly man with dementia. A spiritual scientific practitioner would affirm that the transcendent is there when disease and suffering are recognized together, when the hand that performs the spinal tap distills compassion into the needle's point, the objectivity of science with the subjectivity of God's healing will, the particularity of the case at hand with the universality of a profession under oath, and remember, it is the oath of nursing to provide care, the finitude of the moment and the infinity of a life lived in the service of love. Thus might the clinic be reborn. In the words of the Buddhist leader, Joan Halifax, as caregivers, we encounter many, as Pasternak notes, who trigger those cracks in our heart and open us once again to suffering. Our work as caregivers of those who are dying is never to deny the truth and presence of suffering, impermanence, and death. As we are touched by these realities of existence, we realize that compassion is a moral, social, psychological, and spiritual imperative. But to do this work, we need to focus attention on our own spiritual resources to support our work. These are my colleagues. These are the places that we have been. But Joan Halifax ends by saying, "This is a profound path for those who care for the dying. It is a path that the greatest healers and teachers of the past have walked, and it is a path of sanity that clinicians and caregivers can discover day after day as they care for the dying." But I've underlined here the important words, "It is also beneath the feet of every human being." Fortunately, we live in a time when science is validating what humans have known throughout the ages, that compassion is not a luxury. It is a necessity for our well-being, resilience, and survival. And so I end with this greeting from Joan. May we see into the life of things, and may we have the courage to actualize compassion in our lives for the benefit of all those who suffer. Thank you to Sigma Theta Tau, to the Baxter Foundation, and importantly to all of these nurses who have given me the privilege to share their story today. Thank you very much.
My script says thank you, but I want to say, wow. Your work is such an inspiration, Betty. You truly epitomize our values of leadership, scholarship, and service. And what better example to start our day today. And we thank you and congratulate you again on being the 2013 Sigma Theta Tau International Episteme Laureate. And again, we thank the Baxter Foundation for making this prestigious research award possible since 1989.